So thank you. Thank you all. And with that, Claire, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Thanks everybody for making some time on a Saturday. It means a lot to us. We hope that you learn a couple things and meet a couple cool new people. And yeah, please send us feedback. Let us know if you liked what you heard, if you want to know more, or if there's other things that you are looking to answer in your questions. So thanks again.
Hey, Claire,
Yeah.
I already have an interruption. I'm sorry. So Jennifer Bing, what is Bing Consulting? What do you do? How do we use you? Yeah, can you talk about that for a second?
Jumping right in, Claire.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you all. No, it's really great to be here. And, Brio Financial is a familiar face to me. Obviously, not only do you do all this great work for your clients, but you're an incredibly generous corporation and company in the community. So we appreciate you all. So I have been working in nonprofits and philanthropy for more than 20 years. It's probably edging closer to the higher ends of that, but we'll just go with over 20. Way back in the 90s, I was doing work with HIV and homeless LGBTQ youth, and literally had to raise money for my own program and then started fundraising. And so I've been doing that ever since. 16 years ago, I started my own company, which has been consulting, and I consult with nonprofits. I do a ton of work with my people, with the queer community, in LGBTQ work, but I also do a lot of work in environment and different areas. So I have been working as a fundraising consultant for years, doing a lot of events. So a lot of the awesome fundraising events you've gone to, I have produced or planned over the years. And NCLR has been a client of mine for about a dozen years. And about 3 years ago, I came on as the interim philanthropy director for them. We hired Imani Rupert Gordon about 18 months ago, the day we sheltered in place. She started as the executive director, and she's one of the most kick-ass, amazing women I've ever met. And she said, please stay. And I said, okay. So that's where we're at. But I'd love to tell you about NCLR, but I want to make sure I'm sticking with I don't want to keep going if you have more to say, Claire.
No,
Great. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about NCLR. I think most people know, but not everybody will.
Yeah. So just, obviously it's an NCLR is going to be 45 next year, big year. Let's hope we can have some parties that we have planned. And it's a civil rights, the mission of NCLR is to achieve full and civil and human rights for LGBTQ people, right? We use litigation, legislation, policy, all the words that bore people. However, really what happens behind the scenes is just this incredible, incredible work. NCLR always works at the kind of the live edge of the intersectional struggle of LGBTQ rights. Women founded feminist principles in the 70s when the women's movement didn't want anything to do with lesbians. And quite frankly, the gay movement really didn't want anything to do with lesbians. Lesbians took it upon themselves to be like, our women are losing their children when they come out. And this is the beginnings of NCLR. But what happened right away was a million things, right? NCLR was the first to have an elder law program, the first to advocate for second parent adoption. We just wrote the surrogacy laws for New York State. We work with the NAACP to make particularly religious organizations more queer friendly in their sports, representing transgender kids and adults and seeking sports-based play and things like that and being represented. We're the first to have a successful school case in Southern California 10 years ago, the transgender student, and that changed the entire school district to be more affirming and now be a model for the country. Partner with legal aid organizations across the country. We have rural pride campaigns throughout smaller towns in the community, and we operate the only LGBTQ anti-poverty network in the country. So it's really, obviously it's the big stuff. It's marriage, it's rights to benefits, but it's also really affirming people that really live at the intersection, right? Like LGBTQ people experience racism and genderism and sexism and ableism and are poor more often than not than our straight counterparts. So there's all this of just amazing work happening behind the scenes, right? And we have these genius lawyers that most of us are like, whatever you just did, that's, we are, we're not getting into that nitty gritty, but it really is life-changing work. So with that, like I work with donors. Our donors are family. You know, we see it that way, but I also always call our donors investors. I think there is a model that's shifting in philanthropy, which is people are really smart and they care, and the organizations are really smart and doing great work. And there's a partnership, right? We have a product. Our product is justice and equity, and our donors invest in that work. And they don't just want to hand us some money. They want to know they're making a difference. They want to know they're part of something bigger, and they should have that. And so I really like to you know, create this dynamic where we have a really mutualistic relationship. I can bring the donors in. It's my job to explain what we're doing and make them feel like they understand it, so that they feel like their investment is going a long way. And we've been able to be pretty successful with that, and create a family, right? We all know why we all decide to give. NCLR was my first major gift personally 16 years ago. So, and they still have me. So, you know, they've been doing it right for a lot of years. So we like to keep that going.
Amen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for providing all that color, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Certainly. And, you know, clearly you're not very busy at all. So again, thank you for taking the time. Well, so NCLR is an excellent example for the next page that I'm trying to get to go. Hold on one second. There we go. So just a quick overview of the agenda, and we can jump back to some of the things that Jennifer had mentioned. I think it's pretty relevant. So we'll cover philanthropy in America, just a little historical perspective of how this all got started and how it really is ingrained in our culture in America, establishing a legacy in the new generation. And move you beautiful people over here of giving. The motivation behind charitable giving. Jennifer, you had great examples there, like really wanting to be a part of something, really wanting to like know where your money is going. I think that's definitely part of it. And then the 4 most common options for charitable giving. This is where we start getting into kind of the meat of our conversation. We'll review 2 case studies. One, Brandon will review charitable remainder trusts, and Jennifer will cover donor advised funds. And then the tax benefits and vehicles to consider. So, hold on. There we go. Philanthropy in America, way back. So the almshouses were established throughout Europe in the Middle Ages to provide a place of residence for the poor, old, and distressed. This was typically, church religious based. And then, later on, Charitable Uses Act of 1601 was kind of the start of what we all think of as charitable giving. I think when people start thinking about charitable giving in America, they think about things like the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, and the Mellons, and how they all created their own charitable corporations to pave the way for everybody, right? So we think of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is something that I regularly give to. And then today, just as Jennifer was mentioning, almost anyone can do this. It's time, talent, or money, right? So we give money, we get tax breaks, we donate our time, and the average charitable deduction among those returns was about $5,000. Now, Brandon, does that sound right to you? What are your thoughts with that?
I was totally going to jump in on that. That like average, there's that like Yogi Berra quote. It's like you could be average would be having one foot and boiling hot water and the other foot in the freezer or something, and you'd be perfectly fine. Like averages skew everything. So usually when we're talking with clients about it, we're talking like as a % of income as what the average is, because that 5K is totally skewed. I mean, that's 5K is probably what somebody who makes around like 300K a year probably gives about that much, I would say. And the IRS has all those stats, but that's not the average American.
Right. And I mean, if you don't give anything at all, you can always say that you gave $500 on your tax return and there are no receipts required. So I imagine that there's probably a lot of 500s, and then there are like more wealthy individuals are giving a lot more than that 5,000. That's just my thought process on it. Jennifer, anything to add there about the history of charitable giving? I know you covered a lot for your company specifically. Yeah.
I mean, just because, I think it's a really interesting process to understand that, charitable giving came about to fill in gaps, right? Like we have this model of, public good, government support, education, hospitalization, et cetera. And originally we had such an aristocracy, right? The Carnegies, we had this wealth class that was very removed, and they gave to support everybody else, right? And I think and I mean, we could say that we have a little bit of that still sometimes, but I really think what has happened, and what I like to say is, like, I love to do philanthropic education with people. I used to do this in my early 30s when I first started giving money, and my friends would be like, I can't give money, as we sat drinking copious amounts of wine at dinner. Like, you can. And I used to joke about, like, look at people's shoes, and I'm like, you can give. And it's not that and it's not really a guilt thing, but it's more about just understanding our role as community members, and I think that's really changed. I mean, we've seen this in natural disasters and movements and, people stepping up. But I think my thing is that, everyone should and can, right, in different ways. I mean, you have religious organizations who have tithed for centuries, right? Like, this is just this model of what is your community? How do you see your role? And, and I think and you all, there are a million ways that you can take advantage of that and use it for, and really maximize your giving and your resources. But I think it's changed over time. And I love to talk about sort of everyone as a donor, not just obviously the people who have had the good fortune to make, a lot of money should be giving, but we all can consider ourselves part of our community in that way.
Well, and I always and if you don't have money, you have time. I mean, everyone has
something to offer.
Right. And different skill sets. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. And, just to close that, it is part of the DNA of America for all of those reasons. It may have started with the aristocracy class, but really, and you can see from this pie chart, the majority of money comes from individuals these days. This is a great graph. You can tell that we have the donor advised fund over here and the charitable remainder trust. You can tell that the two things that we're going to be talking about most today do cover a fair amount of charitable giving, but most of it does come from the wills from people. From people giving in from their estates. Now, is there anything that you'd like to add on that, Jennifer?
I know we're focusing a little more on charitable remainder trusts and donor advised funds today, which is great. But yeah, legacy giving is a really powerful tool now for a lot of us. I know I can just say personally, I do well in life, but I own a home, and as I met with, I always say this and it startles people, but I don't plan on giving all of my estate to my children. I hope to be really old, and I hope they'll be very fine and settled when I pass away. And we are already at this point in our lives, my wife and I, thinking about how we will maximize the giving in our estate. And so I just really encourage and talk about that with people. Like, I just encourage everyone to not just think about it, but talk to your advisors, and also talk about it. If you're thinking about doing this and you're looking at organizations, there's, especially when you're talking about future giving, I think people get really nervous. Like, what are you going to do with this? And, organizations can't tell you what they'll do with it in 30 years because all those people probably won't be there doing it. But find a place that really is rooted in what you hope to see in the world, and make that part. You can do a remainder gift in a will. When you've got a bunch of little kids, like, it can always be this, like, I'm going to set it over here. If anything's left, I'm going to give something, or I'm going to put $5,000 towards this. And then as you revise that, trust or will, you can keep changing that, but keeping that in early, I think, is really important, because it starts you thinking along the lines of what does it mean to leave a legacy gift in some way. I think more of us can do it than we realize.
Yeah, and I think I'd just like to interject anecdotally and personally is, donor, legacy, will, estate, all of those words sound very intimidating, right? It sounds like, well, $5,000 wouldn't make a difference or whatnot, but I have made in my will a provision for a charity that's important to me, and it's only $10,000, but that's important to me to at least have that baked in.
Yeah.
So-
And to add to that from the nonprofit perspective, Shannon, it is valid. It is important because I will tell you what we don't budget is estate giving, right? It's never budgeted. It cannot be budgeted, understandably. Even if we know we're getting an estate gift, sometimes they take a long time, right? But I will tell you that hands down, the most exciting day is when you get a notice that somebody who cared about you as an organization left you in their will, and at any amount. It is a really powerful thing for an organization. It's an amazing gift to get that little cushion. You have no idea when it will hit. I mean, NCLR itself has been through various financial, successes and challenges over the years, right? And it has, sometimes those estate gifts have been the very thing that has allowed them not to have to shrink in size or let go of staff. It has been the thing that has held people up. So you just never know.
Hey, I have a quick favor. So I saw Ron Peoples come into this. So Ron, I'm about to just randomly throw you into the wolves. Sorry, but I have a question, because when I'm talking, so Ron is an estate planning attorney, and oftentimes when I'm working with clients and we're doing like beneficiary forms or having the conversation, I always bring up, hey, what about charity? Because they're like, oh, just, leave it 50-50 to my 2 siblings, whatever. I'm like, what about charity? Because I feel like everybody always gives a little bit while they're alive, but somehow the will piece of it or the at death piece, they don't seem to do that as much. Do you have certain, so my question to you, Ron, is, are there certain things that you do or ways in which you get people to quote, get people to get serious about giving some money in their estate planning?
I think having the conversation is important. So explaining to people options, possibilities, the stuff you guys are going to talk about today, but also what it means to leave your legacy. I think if we had somebody like Jennifer, though, who could educate, what I'm seeing just generally is a lack of education among the 20 to 30 year range. I had a client recently from Zoom, unbeknownst to him, end up making like $17 million without him having even thought about it. And so when I was trying to have this conversation with him about charitable giving, it wasn't even a thought in his head. And he was resistant and didn't want to. He just, I'll give it to my brothers if I pass. They don't need all that money. So trying to have that conversation, if we could get somebody like Jennifer in educating, though, that the tech communities, that would be helpful, because I have the conversation, but I have found younger generations being more reticent or less open to this idea.
I would do it anytime. I love it. Figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
I seriously love it. I mean, Ron, what you just said, and of course you take care of your family, and especially if you've made money. I mean, I grew up very working class, so the idea that I could help my siblings is wonderful, but it's also the conversation around generational wealth and in spreading that, right? And sort of like, what does it mean to be able to not just take care of your brothers or your siblings or your kids or, but to also have like a bigger impact, right? And feel like you're part of something bigger. And I think it's just the language isn't used. And especially like you said, people nowadays, who are coming into money quickly, right? It's not a slow grade, increase. It's like this boom, yeah.
I think what you also said is really powerful. And one thing I try to remind clients is, if you're toying with the idea of including a charity, just remember that charitable gift is going to be life-changing to that organization, and the things they're going to be able to do with it is amazing. And when you put that perspective to people when they're talking about just numbers, I think putting that idea behind it will get people more open to the idea of adding in charitable gifting to their legacy. And you throw in, the 401k fact that you can designate charities and have them be tax exempt from the accumulated income tax in their 401ks and using those as charitable vehicles, using the trust or the will to loop that all back into one picture. If you can throw in tax savings, people really love that. And I think you guys are going to get into some of that with the CRTs or the CLTs as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but I think people are almost equally as excited as some people get about like being able to help the charity or to like further the cause. I think people also get equally excited about screwing the IRS.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best.
Whatever the motivation works, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you look at this chart, it's actually further down than you might expect.
Oh.
But it does point well to there are lots of reasons, right? And I think, Ron, thank you for bringing up all the different ways that you can loop things in, like tax deferred accounts. That's certainly something I'm sure people will be more interested to hear about. Brandon, now you also have kind of your own philosophy or rationale to not leave kids all of your money, which I think is pretty powerful. If you want to speak to that.
It's where do I go with that? So, I mean, one of the
Sorry.
okay. One of the great things about what we do, as financial planners is we have a really good idea of what this person's future finances are going to look like, right? And so I think once you get a really like legitimate assessment of where you are and where we think you're going, then I think it helps allow you to be more generous while you're alive, because it's, while it's always lovely to be able to leave money behind once you pass away, it's just a whole lot more fun to do it while you're alive, right? You get to see it and enjoy it. And like God only knows NCLR could use your money today, right? Not 30 years from today. So I do think there's a huge benefit to trying to give as you go along. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, and just to finish the point that I was hoping you would make is that, leaving kids all of your money, just like not thinking about it, just saying 50-50 goes to my kids, it kind of ruins them in a way. You want them to be able to build up their wealth in the same way that you did and get all those benefits of working for it. So
sure.
With
and
that,
not to just one point that I didn't make before too, that's another great way to loop in when you're talking to clients, the idea of a donor advised fund and working together on something like that as a family. And so that's a conversation we typically try to have as well, just to loop that back.
It's great.
Ron, did you see this deck before you came on? So there are lots of different options for giving. We are covering just a few of the many ways. Direct giving, private community foundations, corporate foundations, donor advised. Jennifer, do you want to speak to any one of those or add anything that we don't have there?
No, I mean, I can certainly, well, I'll let you go. I think you're going ahead. No, I think those are the most common ones for sure.
Can I jump in here just really quick? Another thing for us that I think is really cool is that for some of our really higher net worth clients, the conversation we have with them is, how much do you want to leave to your kids? If you've got someone with a net worth of $20 million who has really strong ethics or beliefs around not wanting to spoil their kids, we'll get them to identify how much is enough. We have clients where it was like their net worth is $20 million and they feel like $5 million per kid is enough. And so getting them to articulate that when they weren't really charitably inclined anyway, then opens their minds to, oh, so if I really feel strongly to only give my kids this much, what am I going to do with the rest of this money?
Yeah. And Pam, I just want to say, I think that's I love this. I could go on this conversation forever around like what you give your kids. Cause I said this at a meeting one day with donors and 3 people called me later to thank me, but they were shocked. Like I was like, my kids are not giving all my money. And they're like, oh. I was like, right now they're little enough that I have it sort of to take care of them, but that is not what I want to do. But I will say that, what you just said about getting people to think about what is enough and then opening up that opportunity for a family foundation or even easier, a donor advised fund, like Ron just said, to do together. because one of the things that we can do for our kids, which we try to do in all the other ways, is to teach them how to be givers, right? And teach them how to participate, and back to my point of investing in their community. They're going to learn, if they have those kind of resources, they're going to learn how to invest in the market. They're going to learn how to maximize their income and their wealth. They can also learn how to invest in the community in a smart way, and they can do it together, which really is like a values check as a family too, which is kind of fun to do. I mean, I don't always agree necessarily, but it'd be really interesting to see, so I've had some donors who are really, we have a donor now who's handing it to the next generation, right? She's like, my kids will now be meeting with you once a year to talk about what they want to do. And that's really exciting,
Yeah, truly a legacy in that way. That's lovely.
Mhm.
Excellent. Yeah. So this slide just goes further into the different vehicles that we can consider. I would love Jennifer to talk about a specific case study for donor advised. Yeah.
Great. I love donor advised funds. I'm actually looking at creating one myself right now. We've just started talking about doing one ourselves. And I'm sure everyone here knows how they work, but quickly, it is a fund, and it's held usually by a community foundation or an organization that holds the fund. It allows contributors to make gifts of cash and non-cash assets, which are easier to do through the fund than it is to do directly to a nonprofit sometimes, who can't always handle stock and securities gifts. They don't always have the resources to do that. You get an immediate tax deduction. You have this ability to give this money away. The money's making more money potentially for charitable giving. And usually, like a group like Horizons Foundation or the San Francisco Foundation, the Jewish Community Foundation, they will support the donor in sort of helping determine what, the due diligence around what nonprofits are good and what's their score like on Charity Navigator, and how does this look for, does this fit your needs? So it's just this really exciting way for donors to take their gifts and move them to another level. I have one of my favorite donors. He just happens to be one of my favorite people too, but he's been giving to NCLR for over 30 years. He started giving at a men's event back when sort of, NCLR was like the women's group, and this idea of just split, but he was like, we need to support, he's an older man now, but we need to support our lesbian sisters, right? And he started giving. He would give annually, and he just sort of made his gift at the end of the year and would come to this holiday party. And then as he started getting older, he would talk with us more about like wanting to give more, but not sure where he should be giving it. And he ended up opening up a DAF with Horizons Foundation about 15 years ago. And what we've seen since then is so exciting. Like he probably also retired around the same time. So I'm sure there was like a time availability there, but he takes it on as a really important role of his. So, he takes that investor role really seriously. He pays attention to what we're doing. He does this with other organizations. We have coffee or lunch twice a year. We explore where he wants to give. His money has grown, so he's got more money to give, right? He puts a little bit of money in each year, but this fund keeps kind of growing for him. And he gives more now. He gives 4 times what he gave when he started. And I don't think that is solely because of, a wealth increase. It was more just of a participatory role he plays and how much he loves. He sees his DAF as a vehicle for him to actually be engaged in a way that writing a check at the end of the year didn't feel that way. And we see this with a lot of donors. They're really thoughtful. I don't think it's that and this is obviously anecdotal. I don't know this for sure. But I don't think it's that only really thoughtful donors open DAFs. I think that opening a donor advised fund makes people think a little differently about how they give. And it's exciting for us because for me, I really want donors to feel engaged and invested. And so, the benefits are just really profound, and I think to Ron's point before, or maybe Brandon made it, I think Ron said this young man hadn't even thought of giving. It creates a way that it's part of your investment process, right? Like it's a way that the DAF is also something you manage. So if once you put money in there, it's not an afterthought to write a check in December. It's, oh, I'm going to give money out of this. Let's pay attention to where I might want to give or what I haven't thought of before, or where I could really make a difference. So I just love the partnership with our donor advised fund donors.
So,
Also, I know this is silly, but one of my favorite things to do with a client is ask them, what are they gonna call their DAF, right? Like
Right.
when you tell people that they get to name it.
Name it. They love it.
Like the whatever family foundation, one of my clients named it their family name, Charitable Fund number 11. But then they take ownership of it and they get excited to give. It's like it's their personal. I'm like, you have a family foundation. And to your point about, in December, it's not I have to, it's I want to.
We're going to sit down and do this.
I have a family foundation.
Yeah.
And people really love that.
I have to tell you, one of my favorite donor advised funds names is Kicking Assets. Is that not genius? So it's a gentleman down in LA who funds us every year, and I just love it. I love
it. So I'm not sure if it's okay. I'm going to go into a little bit more of the financial reasons why donor advised funds are so useful.
Yes, please.
Good. Okay. All right. Because I'm not sure everybody on this call actually gets donor advised funds super easily. So, and I will also say they've been around forever, but they're way more popular today than they were previously. So in part because of just tax law changes. So it used to be that the standard deduction was much lower. And so it was much easier for people to get over that threshold with their donations. But I think it was in 2017, the TCJA Act increased the standard deduction so high that a lot of people, when they were giving to charity, it actually wasn't tax deductible to them, right? They weren't getting to benefit from it. So one of the biggest concepts is just bunching of deductions that we talk about a lot. So if you're someone who regularly gives, let's say $5,000 a year, but you're still under the standard deduction threshold, what we'd like to do is which is it's like 12,500 a person, somewhere in there right now, I think. So if you're adding up all your itemizable deductions, if you're not getting over that threshold, you're kind of wasting it, if you will. So instead, if you're somebody who normally gives $5,000 a year, what we might have you do is let's put $20,000 in this year, and then not donate any money for the next 3 years. And in those years, you would benefit from the standard deduction. And then in the 5th year, you would go again with another big donation into your donor advised fund so that you would get to be able to write it off. And then in the off years, you're just taking advantage of the standard again. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So the donor advised fund allows you to control the timing of when you're taking a tax write-off, which is pretty cool for people, right? I can put the $20K into the donor advised fund. That's when I get my tax deduction. Once the $20K is inside of there, then I get total control over when I give that money out to the real charities, and I get to pick, right, which charities, and I can change it whenever I want to. So that piece of it, just like that bunching, how you bunch deductions together. And we've done that with other things, right? You can bunch other things like property taxes or state taxes or things to try and help manipulate your taxes on a year-to-year basis. But the donor advised fund is a super powerful one. So there's that piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is we often will gift highly appreciated assets instead of cash. So it's fine for cash, right? Because of what I just talked about, but it also works even better by having assets that's funded. Because the donor advised fund essentially will allow me to avoid capital gains taxes. So if, let's say I have stock that's worth $10,000 and it's grown a bunch, right? It's Apple, Facebook, Dropbox, whatever stock it is, right? And it has a whole bunch of growth in there. If I sell it, I have to pay capital gains taxes on that. And just to be clear, capital gains taxes are on the federal level, it's usually either 15 or 20%. And there's also a net investment income surtax of like 3.8% that often comes into play depending on your income. And then the state of California doesn't really care. All income is income to California. They just tax it along with everything else. So there's no distinction on capital gains for California. So, I mean, you can, in the higher brackets, I mean, you're talking up to like 38%, I think it gets into. So it can be a really big haircut if you're selling that stock, right? So instead, you donate the stock. So again, if I had $10,000 and I sell it, potentially, you know, I only have $7,000 left, in which case the charity would only get $7,000 worth of good. I would only get a $7,000 write-off, and the IRS walks with, you know, $3K. So in this situation, you can give $10,000 worth of stock into the donor advised fund. It's sold inside of there because it is a charity in and of itself. It doesn't pay any taxes. So therefore the IRS kind of gets cut out of the equation. You get a 10K write-off, the charity gets 10K of good. Make sense? Okay. All right. I'm seeing a little bit of head shaking. So that's why donor advised funds are so useful to us. And then the other thing is, so it helps us kind of control that timing, you know, on a year-to-year basis. But I also am very often talking to clients about trying to look at it over the course of their lifespan. So, you know, if I know you know, I've got 5 years until retirement, 10 years, whatever, probably when I'm working is when I'm in the highest tax bracket. And that's probably when I want my biggest tax write-off deduction. So a donor advised fund kind of allows me, while I'm working, I'm going to contribute a bunch of money while I'm working, because that's when I want to take the tax write-off. And then by the time I get to retirement, I've got this like philanthropic war chest ready to go that I can then spend, you know, my retirement giving away. Because when I want the write-off up front, it's not going to do me as much good when I'm retired and my income's really low.
Okay, I have an ignorant question. So for money that you put into a donor advised fund, is there any means of taking it out should you need it for another purpose?
Nope. I mean, it's got to go to a 501c3. I guess you could, you know, declare yourself a church or something. I don't know, but otherwise, no. No. Once you donate the money into the donor advised fund, you take the tax write-off up front. The money's inside of there, and it ultimately has to go to a 501c3 charity, right? And like I think as Jennifer was saying, you know, the money inside of there, you can do, I mean, you can invest it and, you know, however you want, really. And so it allows for a ton of growth to happen, all tax-free. Now, you're not benefiting from that growth. It's really the charities that are going to benefit from that growth.
Got it.
But
Yeah, you have to almost look at the,
/.
you almost have to look at the donation like you've made a donation, right? It's just that you're making it to your fund, so then you can manage that, giving that over time, and you can grow it, and you get a full tax deductibility from it. You know what I mean? So there's, yeah, but it's, you almost have to see it as like, I've made this gift to a nonprofit.
The gift. Yeah.
Ahead of time, right? Like I already know I've done this.
Well, and that's mechanically, that is exactly what's happening, right? And then, so the donor advised fund, the name of advised is because you essentially like recommend that the donor advised charity gives these things. And of course they're going to do it because that's the way the whole thing is set up. But essentially that's what allows you to take that big tax break all in the 1 year.
Yeah. Right. Another, I know this sounds really petty, but one of the other benefits of a donor advised fund is, you know, if I'm dumping $10,000 into it up front and then giving away $100 here and $500 there or whatever, I don't, for my taxes, I only have to worry about that one $10,000 receipt and I'm done. I don't have to worry about all the little receipts every year.
I don't think that's petty at all. I think it's genius. I gotta tell you, like, that's one of the reasons that we have talked about having, because I feel like at the end of the day, I give money away in so many ways. And like literally at the end, I'm like, which account did I even take that from? Like, oh,
exactly.
You know, did I mark it right in my QuickBooks? Like, did I? Yeah.
Yes, it's useful. It's super useful. And then the bigger one, like to what you were talking about earlier, is when you're giving a bigger chunk of money, instead of those little one-offs, because somebody's doing it the age right and somebody else is on the walk and, you know, whatever, like it does force you, I think, ultimately it forces people to get much more serious about planning out how they're going to give and be much more strategic about it, which we adore.
Brandon, talk a little bit about beneficiaries of a donor advised fund. Do you give it to the charity? Do you give it to your kid? Like, how does that all work?
I mean, you can do either, right? So the thing is, once the money's inside the donor advised fund, it's now a charity, right? So if you want to, upon your passing, because there's probably going to be some money left over in there, right? So you can go ahead and designate which charities get that remainder, or you can also have someone else take it over upon your death and let them be in charge of it. And so back to kind of that like family values thing, I think it's really powerful for people to know like, hey, this is one of our things as a family. It's really important. And here's how you do it. And here's what like the money's there. Now it's up to the next generation to take over and figure out what matters to them.
Yeah, and I just think about that from the child perspective. If my father, say, had passed and then I got the donor advised fund and I'm annually making gifts in his name, it just feels very powerful, very like there's an immortal sense to it, which I really like. But you know, if your kids don't agree with your values, then you have to know that they can donate to whatever they want. So I mean, that's a lot of information on donor advised funds. And again, everybody here, if you guys have more questions, reach out to us. We can connect you to whoever it be, Ron, Jennifer, Brandon. We have lots of resources. Brandon, let's transition a bit. And if you want to start talking about the CRT vehicles, which are a little bit different, and you can explain why.
Sure. Although before you do, I'm going to ask if does anybody have questions on donor advised funds? Because I feel like they are super easy and useful, and once you explain it to people, a lot of times they're like, oh, well, you know, like what's the catch? And like there isn't a catch. They're really useful.
And is there any minimum?
So yeah, there usually are minimums. That's a good question. So they're usually, and it all depends on the provider, right? But there usually are some kind of minimum as to how much you contribute to begin with. And some, and I would say often they're like 5K. Does that sound right, Jennifer, to you?
I think Horizons is 5. The San Francisco Foundation might be 10.
Yeah.
It's pretty, yeah.
It's very approachable. Yeah.
The donor advised funds that we use for Brio do not have a minimum.
Oh, okay. So then
one other point, just also if you're there are foundations that if you're just going to have the donor advised fund funded through a trust or a will, meaning on death, that they'll set it up during your lifetime for free though, so you can get one that's already a vehicle for your future legacy gift in your will or trust. That's just another.
Okay, we have a few other questions coming in. One via the chat was, can third parties like children or other family members contribute to their DAF and get the tax benefits?
It's up to, I mean, whoever's giving, you can give. If you're the giver, you get the benefit.
Okay. And then also follow up to that, can the DAF thus become a traveling fund over generations?
Oh, you know, I don't know. Ron or Jennifer, do you all know, like, at what point does it cease to exist? I know.
I don't know.
Yeah, I've only done them.
You can give it, if you can give it to like keep it intact, like you were saying before, Brandon, like you either at time of death, you distribute the funds to certain nonprofits or you hand it to someone else to manage. I think it does then.
Yes, but I don't know. I personally have never done it like down to a third generation. Like
right. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any limitations either. So I think as long as there's money and successors, it can continue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. All right, another question here. Is there a cost to setting one up?
Of course there's a cost. There's always a cost. Now, but usually, honestly, the cost of these things are usually very, very minimal. And I would say there are two like main things we deal with. One is like a community-based foundation like Horizons or SF Foundation. And then I'll lump also like investment-based solutions. So, you know, the Schwab Charitable Fund or Fidelity or Vanguard, you know, they all have big, massive donor advised funds. And so, you know, they all achieve the same end result. The big difference is with a community-based one, a lot of times they're smaller, right? So they might not have as many bells and whistles, but they have more hand-holding for sure. They're much more personal. Whereas like if you go to a big investment-based one, honestly, the fees inside are usually cheaper. The fees ultimately are usually based more off of the investments inside of it that you're choosing. And from, from where I sit, it's usually the investments that we care about. But the big institutional ones also, they're so massive, they're able to deal with all kinds of things, right? So if you have your Van Gogh artwork, you can donate it, they can actually handle that kind of thing for you, or houses or whatever. Whereas the smaller community-based foundations they're just not built to handle those more complicated assets.
Okay. And Claire, would you have any ballpark to share about the cost of setting one up?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Brandon said. The investment fees are generally where the price comes in. For if you're a Brio client, say, it would be like opening up a managed investment account. So it's all along the same lines of in your investments. And I would add that if you go to somebody like Schwab or Fidelity or some larger platforms, just make sure that you know how they manage your assets once it comes in, because a lot of places, especially when you don't meet these really high minimums, like 250,000 or something, they'll automatically sell the Apple, the Facebook, the whatever, and they'll put it in their own managed fund. And so sure, it can grow. You can tell them like, I want growth, but you have no decision over that. And so what we do at Brio is we have open architecture. If somebody really doesn't want to get rid of that Apple, they can keep it and it can keep growing inside of our own accounts.
Okay, great. And I think Ida has a question.
It's actually Inette, but thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So Ida and I set up a donor advised fund this year with Horizons. And right now it's set up as a legacy fund. I think of it as a reparations fund that when we die, for money to go to racial justice and equity organizations and causes. But what we're trying to figure out now is our strategy for more of the give while we live, which we've always done a lot of giving throughout the year. And some of it's monthly donations to the same organization. Some of it is the flurry of December giving, when we take advantage of the matching and all that stuff to help organizations out that way. And I just create my own spreadsheets to track all that as we give. Some of it's very ad hoc, like we just did a donation to help Afghan refugees. So we're trying to figure out, we didn't set up the Give While You Live so far with the DAF because we were already into this calendar year and we'd already been giving things and we thought it would be too confusing at the end. But for 2022, we're trying to figure out how to create the strategy for how to do the Give While We Live piece throughout the year, because we have the legacy piece figured out. So any advice, Brandon or Jennifer, that you have about how to think about how to do that would be great.
And sorry, real quick clarifying question. You're asking more around like how much to give out of the donor advised fund, or which charities to use,
not how much, unless there's anything about minimums would be useful to know.
Horizons minimum is 250.
Yeah, Horizons minimum is 250. So it's not how much to give, but kind of the strategy of how we think about, since our giving during the year is so mixed of monthlies, randoms, ad hoc one-time things, the December, like how do we think about doing that to set that up more strategically?
So, and I just want to make sure people understand that 250 minimum that you mentioned is from the donor advised fund to the quote, like real charity. And so that is like one way in which maybe a donor advised fund is not good, is if you're the person who gives, $20 a month to KQED or whatever, like that's not a good use of a donor advised fund. You would just write one check for $250 and be done, right? Jennifer, you're probably best qualified, and I definitely have some thoughts, but you're probably best qualified to talk through like how to be more strategic.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Thanks, Ida. I love your question and I love your reparations fund. I fully support that.
And Jennifer, I will say one of our organizations we always give to is NCLR.
Oh, great. I
Yay.
love that. I thought I might know your names. I was like, I think your names look familiar to me. That's lovely. Thank you. Honestly, I think that this is a great thing. What I was talking about before, how the donor advised fund all of a sudden packages your thinking around your giving. Like you both have probably been just like giving, right? People ask you, it's September, you give, and this one's a monthly and this one's and what I would recommend is towards the end of the year, sit down with your 2021 giving. Look at everything you've done if you can, unless you're like me and you're like, which credit card did I put that on? But, look at what you've done and see if it makes sense to take some of those maybe sustainer gifts. I mean, I'm a big fan of monthly giving because it really helps organizations to know that they're always going to have monthly giving. So I don't tend to talk people out of that, but look at those to the point of the 250 limit. And does it make more sense to take that out of your donor advised fund? Does it make more sense to say, you know what, these are our 15, 10, 5 regular organizations we support. When do we want to do that? Is there sort of an organizational benefit that matters to us? We'll have people, again, I want to mention this too, it's important. We have people that love coming to an event and they want to give to that. You cannot take the non-deductible amount out of your DAF, right? So you always have to separate that gift out, but being prepared for that. Like, you know what? We would rather make our $5,000 gift here a $5,000 event support because we really want to go to that event and we'll pay the non-deductible amount. And that's when we're going to give that. And I think it might be really interesting to see which things for you both are like your friends asked you or you're supporting someone else. And then leaving yourself some room for crisis funding, I call it, Afghan refugees, hurricanes, tornadoes. I mean, we seem to have an endless amount of crises these days. So like, and I think it would be interesting to see like how you can then use and maximize. That's what I would do. And then certainly if you're with Horizons, they're a great resource. They're also secretly have been one of my clients for many years. I adore them. But they're a really good resource in terms of like how you look at the nonprofits, right? And how you're looking at the money going out. And it might change how you decide to put your money in too, right? You might find that by pooling some of those gifts that, that are already 250, but you've been giving them piecemeal and putting them into the fund, you'd have a better picture of your giving. I will tell you, like, I don't, like I said, I don't have a donor advised fund yet, but my family and I do this every year around the holidays. And I mean, tax time is always the time people do it. Ours is just because we're actually all together and I work less, which is the only time of year I work less. But now that my kids are older, like we do a whole family meeting around this, and my wife and I will talk about it ahead of time because we're braced for some of the random things that will come out of their mouths, to Claire's point, like the things they want to do. But, we really sit down and think about it and we pool it and we go, okay, you know what? We gave this much money away this year. Where did we give that we kind of accidentally gave, or I forgot I had monthly donations going to somebody, and we really want to be thoughtful, and we reconvene. So that would be my recommendation. And also always know, from the nonprofit perspective, call us and ask questions. If you're looking at your giving and you realize you've been giving a lot to an organization and you want to know a little bit more about what's happening there. I love receiving calls from donors to say, like, tell me more about what's going on. Let's have a Zoom. It's been all Zoom lately, but let's have a Zoom conversation about what I'm doing, what it would look like to give a legacy gift to you, what you're thinking. That's also really exciting too, because and I'm also always open to say, I just met with a donor recently who is doing this, is looking at their legacy giving, looking at how they're giving every year, want to do racial justice work, also love the arts. And I said, well, I want you to give to NCLR, but here are 3 organizations doing queer art, POC artwork, like work with POCs, like, and really just like awesome, diverse work. I'm like, you should call them. Like, I'll connect you with this person and you should see what they're doing. So we're much more fluid than that. It's not like, oh, good, you're going to give us money. We really want to support you and your process too. So
I would also say, Annette, there's, Brio, like, I don't feel like we are best suited to, like, there are plenty of things, right, that we aren't the expert on. And so we will hire the expert on behalf of our clients. This is one of those areas where we do that. So we've got a couple people that we'll hire to say, hey, will you work with Ida and Annette and come like help them refine their strategy and figure out what really matters to them. And they, you know, it's usually a 2 or 3 sessions over a period of time, like to really like stop, figure out what you care about, figure out what your resources are, figure out, you know, here are a bunch of options. Like Jennifer's saying, like there are so many amazing organizations out there that, you know, people just don't know about. So we absolutely can help you, not us directly, but right, we can go grab like a Deb Stallings, right, who used to be at Horizons Forever. Like she's great at that kind of stuff where she'll help you figure out what your strategy should be.
Great, thank you both.
All right, any other donor advised fund stuff? Okay, charitable trust.
You're up, Brandon.
Yeah, me. Okay, so charitable trust. Okay, so actually, okay, thank you. Okay, charitable remainder trust. And so the whole thing here is if you have a much bigger chunk of money that is highly appreciated and you have some charitable intent, a charitable remainder trust might be a good idea, or a charitable lead trust, which we didn't do an infographic on, but similar type of concept. So with it, so easiest example is usually somebody has a rental property. You know, they bought it a long time ago. It's appreciated a bunch. The problem with a rental property is, and a lot of growth is, again, capital gains. So it's great that I have this asset, but if I sell it, I'm gonna have to pay a giant amount of money over to the IRS and Franchise Tax Board. I might also not want to give up my rental income, right, as the investor. What a lot of people don't appreciate about rental real estate, and I don't know, everyone skewers me when I say these things, but the longer you've held on to the property, probably the crappier the investment is. So you build up all this equity over time, whether it's because you've paid down the mortgage or because more likely because the value of the property has just appreciated. But all that equity that you've gained is awesome on our balance sheet, right? It's great on our net worth. And it's kind of dead weight. It actually isn't doing anything for you because that property is going to appreciate by whatever that property is going to appreciate by. And so just understand that those assets that you've held on to for a really long time maybe aren't that great of investments anymore. So oftentimes at some point it would make sense to either sell it, in which case, because you need the money and you have zero charitable intention. And so you can just pay the tax hit and move on, or we can donate it. And oftentimes when I'm like, well, let's donate it. And then people look at me like, what? That's like my $1 million rental property. You just want me to donate? I'm like, yeah, let's donate that thing. But the cool thing is, so you donate it into a charity, right? So here's and you can read along. I'm not just going to read the slide. I think you're capable of that. But so what happens is, let's take the building, the apartment. We're going to put it into a charitable remainder trust, which we have created. So this is where Ron Peoples or somebody like him would come into play, where they will draft the legal documents for you to create your own charitable remainder trust or lead trust. And we'll put the property in there. That donation then, so there's a donation, we got to figure out how much it's worth, but we're ultimately going to get a write-off for putting that in there. In this case, then now the charity sells the property to make it liquid. So I've got liquid dollars in there. Again, I can do whatever I want with that money. I can invest it. I can let it sit as cash. I could, whatever. And then it's going to pay me an income stream while I'm alive. Or you can actually set them up for a period of time. Like I think it goes from 2 years up to 20 years or something maybe. And it just pays you. Now, how much it pays you, that's Shannon, I'm going to say it. It's either a crut or a crat. These awful. So a charitable remainder unit trust or a charitable remainder annuity trust. And the only difference between those two things is just, you know, are they paying out a specific dollar amount every year, or are they paying out a percentage of however much is left inside of there? mostly with the same result. But the cool thing is, while you're setting up the trust with Ron, you can, increase the income to you while you're alive, which is going to decrease the remainder that is ultimately going to go to the charity upon your death, and also decrease your tax write-off today. Or conversely, you could take out less income, increase the remainder that's going to go to charity, and also increase your tax deduction today as well. I'm going to stop there for a second.
Now, Brendan, is there a minimum amount that you have to donate? That, like, can I take all income, and then, what if there's something left at the end?
Yeah, so it does, I mean, there is a formula, right, that you have to use to come up with how much you take. But literally, like, I think you can go up to a 50% payout. I mean, Ron, am I lying? Could be lying.
There is a minimum percentage that has to pass to the charity at the end. I was just trying to look at what it is, but if you don't meet the minimum, then it fails. So you have to be really careful there.
So I think like when you put the money in there, it's either 5 or 10%. The calculated value, like what is going to remain, either has to be, I forget if it's 5 or 10. 10. Okay. So if you're putting a $1 million thing in there, there should at least be 100K left over to go to the charity at the end of the day. But because that money's probably invested, right, and you're pulling out money, I mean, there's a bunch of guessing to it. And it doesn't have to be perfect by any stretch.
Usually the goal is to outperform whatever you're calculating so that you can get an income stream and have the asset preserved for the charity. And you're going to work with advisors, like a lawyer who's going to have access to tools to help calculate, but it's a team of people who would put together that amount, including your financial advisors at Brio, to make sure it hits the minimums, but also selecting the assets that can produce income, et cetera.
But it can be, I mean, we just did one, I think has a 7% payout. So, I mean, they can be, decent payouts.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. So this is an example of the CRT that Brandon just calculated for some of our clients. They had a property that they wanted to donate, and they are now getting income. These are general estimates from our own calculations. So you would certainly want to be working with an attorney as well.
But essentially, so we took like a $460,000 asset. If the client had just sold it, they probably would have paid. Yeah, I mean, in this case, they probably would have paid about 36% of that would have gone away to taxes, right? So you get to avoid what, 150K or something in capital gains taxes. Instead, it goes into the CRT. They're taking out, so that total distributions, you can see they're taking out like 32K a year is the starting point. It is expected that that'll go up a little bit every year with inflation, essentially. So that, I mean, you end up getting to take a ton of money out. You also get the tax deduction up front. So the tax deduction, just to be clear, you take upfront, and if you can't use it all in the first year, you can roll it forward up to 5 years. So you've got time to use up your donation. If your income is too low to absorb all of the deduction, you have some time to use it. And honestly, the other thing that we do a lot is we will pair this with like a Roth conversion or something where we're creating income intentionally for the client. And so we're always going to use up the deduction, whatever that might be, right? Charitable remainder trust. What is there to know about this?
Brandon, so if I want to do some charitable giving and I'm not, how would you direct me on what would be better, the donor advised fund or the CRT? And what cases would you want to do the remainder trust versus a donor advised?
So the dollar value more than anything else, right? I mean, that with a remainder trust, you're going to have to set up the trust itself, which is you have to. Ron Peoples does not look that pretty for a reason, right? Like he charges money. So you got to set up the trust, and then you also have to. It has its own tax return as well that has to get done every year. It's not a big expense, but there's a little cost to it, right? but beyond that, they're not really very complicated at all. So it's mostly a dollar amount though, right? Because if you're doing 5K, 10K, you're not going to want to do a big trust like that. But $500,000, I think is for sure doable. Ron, at what point, Ron, would you think they would start to make sense?
I think it's dollar amount. It's whatever we think you can put in where you're getting a payout that's significant enough to warrant the amount of administration that is ongoing in the setup fee.
Yeah.
I can add too, I think it's also, there's some, it's your own personal situation too, and sort of what you're looking to do. I have a great example of a charitable remainder trust. I have a good friend who was 89-year-old, awesome lesbian in San Francisco. And she had inherited from her brother's money, right? She was she lived in her home in Noe Valley. She was a school teacher all her life. She was fine, but she was 89 and she had this money that her brothers and she had agreed would go to specific charities. And she created with the stocks and the cash and a charitable remainder trust so that she could get some income for it in her last few years. And so it still felt good to her that the remainder would go to this charity that they had set up, but that was a good tax option for her to get a little bit of income. And she died at 92, right? So she was only alive for 3 more years. So the charity did get a bulk of that money, right? But it was just a really good vehicle for her to still be like, I'm giving this money and I'm not pulling money out of and paying capital gains to take cash out of my account, my stock account, right? My securities. And so that was a really, really a good personal finance option for her. And it was a charitable option, right? It was
a little bit unrelated maybe, but also when we're doing future estate tax planning, if we have a couple or an estate that is going to be taxable later down the road, instead of using the portion of their estate that would go to taxes you could give it to like a donor advised fund, for example, right? And reduce the size of the estate. But if they have a future generation they also want to support, we can also throw it into a CRT that then would pay the next generation for a period of time, but ultimately still go to a charity to get that estate tax deduction. So we can do this type of planning for somebody in a lifetime sense, but also on a death planning sense.
Yeah, perfect. The other thing, so you can also delay, like you don't have to start taking income out of it immediately, right? So that can be useful in certain situations. And the other thing that you just reminded me of, Ron, was like a quote wealth replacement trust sort of a thing. So a lot of times people are like, yeah, but okay, my kids were counting on getting this, rental property or whatever. You can a lot of times what you can do is take that income, right? Whether it's the income that you're getting or the tax deduction that you're benefiting from, kind of take that and use that to go buy a life insurance policy that then kind of makes the next generation whole, if you will. So, really that cool. Usually helps soothe the greedy children.
Oh dear.
Love that. I'm using that.
Shannon, you got this far. You got this far without an oh dear.
And we're full circle to not wanting to give the kids everything.
You also had charitable lead trust, which I didn't put into the deck, but just to be clear, it's kind of like the same. I don't know. I feel like it's very much along the same lines, but in reverse, where you're giving you would take a highly appreciated asset, donate it into the lead trust, and then the charities would get income while you're alive, and then at the expiration, then the remainder goes to your heirs. So it's slightly different take, but I know those work pretty well right now because the interest rates are so cheap, and the way they do the calculation, so you're taking the tax write-off based off of the present value of the future donations, if you will, and because the interest rates are so cheap, like a charitable lead trust works well in today's environment. And then your heirs actually, like if there's excess growth, your heirs get that like tax-free. So that's also another option, but like almost the reverse. Gift annuities are along these lines. A gift annuity Now, a gift annuity, though, is usually very specific to a charity. So especially the massive ones like a Nature Conservancy or something, right? You could just give them money, like give them your house, if you will, or whatever, and then they'll give you an income. But that's always, at least to my knowledge, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, to my knowledge, it's always done through a specific charity. And so you kind of then give up control over who's going to get your money, who the charities are, because they've already got it.
Right. You go through like Best Friends or Nature Conservancy and they're managing it and it's their money at the end of the day. You're not like choosing charities to go to.
Yeah.
You're pre-selecting it.
You've pre-selected it. I mean, in some ways it's a very easy solution. You do nothing, right? You make the choice up front and then you get income out of it, and that's happy. But beyond that, you've just, I don't know, I guess you've delegated all responsibility. Maybe. I don't love lack of control.
Yeah, my experience with that too. I mean, it works if that's the charity. I mean, if that works for you and it's easy and that, they have those, they're big enough that they have those departments to deal with it. My experience with that is that they're not, if you really need some guidance and want some advisement, you should use someone that's going to give you a little more.
Yeah.
They tend to not, I mean, this is an overarching statement, but if you need any hand holding at all, they tend to not be great at that.
Yeah.
Or if you want, you know what I mean? They're like a department of planned giving, and and the staffing shifts. It just isn't having like an advisor where you can check in with. And
yeah, it's a different feel.
Yeah.
I will echo that. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second though. Charitable remainder trust, charitable lead trust, gift annuities. Questions on how those work, who would use them, why you would use them. Going once, going twice.
I have something to say. Can you talk about kind of an example of how there are unintended consequences of intergenerational wealth, i.e. if the parents who are massively wealthy die and leave money to their kids, but have done a horrible job of estate planning and left their kids with massive tax consequences? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So
I'm thinking in particular of one client that we know and love that had this happen to them.
I don't know, the one I screamed at.
You've screamed at so many, I can't remember. We have a meeting with them on Monday.
Okay.
That's all I'm gonna say.
I actually, I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about. So are you talking about like, if a parent just kind of puts their head in the sand and then
exactly
you
right.
dump a bunch of money into a child's lap, and it's like, winning the lottery, that, the statistics around these things are horrifying.
Correct.
The kids, they're not, it's the people aren't used to dealing with big chunks of money being dumped into their lap, and especially if it's at a younger age, right? And so you end up with horrible outcomes. I mean, the kids, whatever, you're like asking for a drug addiction.
Oh dear.
A shiny red car.
Or shiny red car. That's nice. That's more nicely said. Yes.
Yes.
And so Pam, I'm sorry, what are you thinking about, like in terms of
I'm sorry. For example, this client had inherited a fair amount of real estate and possibly a business, and the taxes were so high that by creating a charitable remainder trust, it mitigated some of the taxes that they were exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, they're super powerful from just like the straight up numbers, like the math of it from our perspective, the financial piece of it is like super powerful. I mean, it's amazing. Honestly, it's amazing what you can do when you cut the government out, right? Like you kill the IRS, the FTB, and you got a lot more money to play with. And that's one of, like, I guess, again, Ron, you feel free to correct me, but I always feel like when I'm dealing with estate planning, I've got like 3 buckets, right? I've got like the IRS, charity, and my heirs. And they're like, you just kind of get to move between those 3 buckets and you maximize one and take away from the other. Charity, IRS, or your heirs, take your pick.
Yeah. I mean, you guys all said it. Don't have too much to add there. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Ron, for attending and being put on the spot multiple times. We super, super
pleasure.
appreciate.
Yay for
your-
Ron.
Yeah,
Right.
you
Yeah.
Oh,
really.
hey, can sorry, I want to do, before, it sounds like you're wrapping up, but before you wrap up, can I just say for a couple like quick, just other thoughts on like more specific, is like the timing of gifts can be really impactful, right? So whether it's just little case by case or bigger, using like a donor advised fund or something, like you like coordinate it with your income. And there's so many ways to create income. So just make sure you're thinking about it intelligently, or talking to your financial planner or whatever to do that. I also wanted to QCDs, so qualified charitable distributions, we did not specifically bring up, but it's something that we use quite a bit. So once you hit 72, you have to take required minimum distributions out of any pre-tax retirement accounts, right? Basically, the IRS says, let us have these tax breaks all these years, but at some point they're like, we need our revenue. That's at age 72. So you're forced to pull money out of your like traditional IRA, whether you want to or not. But you, in lieu of an RMD, you can do a qualified charitable distribution. And for whatever reason, I don't think they've ever fixed it. You can start doing qualified charitable distributions at age 70 and a half. So at 70 and a half, you can take money out of your like pre-tax traditional IRA monies, give that directly to charity, and then that does not count as income to you. So you also don't write it off as a donation, right? You don't get to double dip, but not having the income is way more impactful than not having the deduction. So just if you're over 7 and a half, no, qualified charitable distributions are also super useful.
Okay, we have a couple questions here. One is, are other people using Brio to train, educate the future beneficiaries, especially regarding these charitable options?
Oh my God, is that a plug? I like who wrote that. Yes, absolutely. We adore it. And I sound awful as I say this, but like, I love getting my greedy little hands into like the next generation so I can brainwash them as young as possible. Absolutely.
To be wealthy and live their best life.
Yeah.
That too. Truly though, like we adore, like if I can talk to people, when they're, I mean, honestly, like money is a really important thing. And to me, like, I hate how taboo it is. So but it's so powerful when it's all around us. And for a lot of people, like, they'll share like details of their sex life before they would their money, right? And so I love talking about these things. And the younger the person is, when I can get to them, I think the healthier their relationship to money is. And so for sure, we would love to talk to all generations, whether it's a family planning meeting, or a lot of times it's useful just to do one-on-ones with younger people. Because
Brandon truly adores that piece of it on anything related to financial planning, giving, investing. He loves. Yeah. So great question here. Can one use a qualified charitable distribution to fund a DAF?
No,
Oh.
you may not. Sorry.
Well,
Well, and you're giving up one of the 2 tax deductions, right? If you do a qualified distribution to a charity, no tax. Putting money into a DAF, no tax. Do both.
Right. Do both. There you go.
Yeah.
all right. And then a follow-up, like, please plug away to the training programs for future investors. So yes, we are here as a resource for those nearest and dearest to you in any way we can help, as always.
And if you're a Brio client who has children and we haven't talked to them yet, make an appointment for us to talk to your kids, please.
Absolutely. And Brandon does this often. I mean, the kids don't even have to be 18 or older. I forget who the exact person was, but you talked to a 13 or 14-year-old the other day. It had wonderful consequences. So the earlier, the better, really. And I think that they, you know, as a mother, I think that your kids really appreciate you treating them as though they're an adult, and they'll take it more seriously,
Yeah.
just letting them have that kind of independence.
Yeah.
And I'll take a moment just to share for one of Pam's clients that she's ushered through many stages, brought her now 18-year-old daughter to open her first account, and she wanted to sign the paperwork in person, in pen, none of this DocuSign business. She, you know, her mom had been including her in those sort of conversations for so long that she was just primed and ready to go. So we'd love to have the opportunity to speak to those folks important in your life. All right, any other questions about charitable giving, models in which we can get the tax benefits to do so strategically? Jennifer, anything to add?
Oh, this was great.
Okay, we love that. Okay. Well, we're always here, and as Brandon intimated, you know, if we don't have the answer, we can find someone that does. We have partners, community partners in every and all aspects. So we will put you in touch with whomever to help you make those decisions if we can't help you make them. Brandon, anything to add to wrap up? Did we lose him?
Give your money away. You can't take it with you.
Yeah, well,